Ontario officials have provided their thoughts on the events surrounding the anti-racism and police brutality protests. More on that story from Eagle News correspondent Ashley Sackmar.
On June 2nd, Ontario Premier Doug Ford was asked to comment on the ongoing anti-racism and police brutality protests happening throughout the United States and Canada. These protests began after the deaths of George Floyd, a black man who died at the hands of a white police officer in Minneapolis last May 25th, and Regis Korchinski-Paquette, an Indigenous black woman who fell off her balcony in Toronto when police officers were in her home last May 27th. When he answered, Premier Ford claimed that Canada is different from the United States. Take a look.
And I'm worried about Ontario. That's what I'm concerned about. They have their issues. There's no doubt they have their issues in the U.S. and they have to fix their issues. But it's like night and day compared to Canada and the U.S. I'm proud to be Canadian. I'm proud to be the Premier of Ontario, and I know Canadians just won't tolerate it.
Ford claimed that Canada does not have the systemic deep roots that America has when it comes to racism. Take a look.
And thank God that we're different than the United States. And we don't have the systemic, deep roots they have had for years.
After the backlash the Ontario Premier received for his statement, Ford readdressed the issue of systemic racism the following day during the House of Commons question period.
Of course, there's systemic racism in Ontario. There's systemic racism across this country. I know it exists, Mr. Speaker. What I don't know is the hardships faced by those communities.
Other Ontario officials have provided their thoughts on the events surrounding the anti-racism and police brutality protests. Mississauga Mayor Bonnie Crombie addressed the issue as well, saying that Canadians should not look south, but look inward and realize that Canada has much work to do.
Like so many Canadians, I've been watching what's been happening south of the border. The protests in the U.S. are the culmination of pent-up anger, frustration, and fear of a system that permits far too much discrimination and death. In Canada, we are far from blameless. We should not look south and be smug, but look inward and realize that we have much work to do in our own country and in our own city.
Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson posted on his Twitter account the following. Take a listen. While the death of Mr. Floyd has focused most attention on the United States, we know that as a country, we are not immune to racism or racist behavior, and we are far from perfect. Racism is present in our midst. Jim Watson, Mayor of Ottawa. In Toronto, Mayor John Tory emphasized that in light of all these current issues, the key to moving to where we need to be is solidarity.
I went on to say that we are shocked at what we see happening in the United States, but we must acknowledge that we are not immune from some of those very same issues right here. Anti-black racism does exist in our city and in our country. That is an important and honest acknowledgement for me to make as your mayor, because it forms an important part of the framework for action. You have to be honest about the existence of a problem if you want to meaningfully address it.
Amidst the ongoing COVID-19 crisis, racism is a crisis that runs much deeper and for far much longer in society. In Toronto, Ashley Sackmar, Eagle News, we live in interesting times.